thank you for visiting the channel Echoes of Crime. Today, I want to tell you a story, a service that seems like it only happens in horror movies, but it is a real pain in a peaceful town in California. An 8-year-old girl was lost in broad daylight while playing right in front of her house. The whole search process was chaotic. The family fell into despair. And when her body was found in a suitcase in a lake, everyone expected it to be an accident or a stranger to do it. But no, the girl's killer was a woman, a neighbor, a mother, a Bible teacher, someone she once trusted, someone the whole town once respected. So what really happened to Sandra Cantu? What could make a woman, a mother, do such a thing to a child? And would we really recognize danger if it was wearing protective gear and reacting every day? Come back with me to 2009 to discover the truth behind this horrific project. When the black suitcase was pulled from the bottom of the ditch, it weighed little more than an empty backpack. But inside was a dream. This could have belonged to a little girl seen, motionless as if trying to move in circles to escape the horror. Her name was Sandra Cantu, 8 years old in 2nd grade. An innocent child who loved stuffed animals, loved to draw rainbows, and who had been playing in the yard just the day before. But this was no ordinary arrest. And certainly not a crazed killer. The killer came not from far away, but from someone Sandra's family had trusted. A woman, a mother, a Bible teacher. To understand what happened, we need to go back in time to that fateful afternoon. March 27, 2009, the small town of Tracy, California, was as sunny as ever. Orchard Estates, a quiet mobile home park on the edge of town, was where Sandra's family lived. It was a neighborhood of working-class people, single parents, and retired grandparents. A close-knit community where children played freely and everyone knew their neighbors' children by name. Sandra had just come home from school. After a snack, she went outside to play just like she always did. It was about 3:45 p.m. Her mother, Maria, watched her daughter from the window. She wasn't worried. Sandra always played close to home, in the yards, on the cobblestone paths where kids played soccer, jumped rope. No one knew that would be the last time Maria saw her alive. As the clock ticked toward the afternoon, Maria began to worry. Sandra usually got home before 6 p.m., especially when it was getting dark. She called the neighbors. No one had found her. She walked around the block, her heart pounding with every step. No tracks, no laughter, no distinctive pink sweater. At 7:53 p.m., Maria Cantu called 911. Her voice was shaking. "I can't find my daughter. She's 8. She went out to play and now she's gone." Within 30 minutes, the police were at Orchard Estates. Search teams were mobilized overnight. Locals used flashlights, calling Sandra's name, searching every alley. They believed, or tried to believe, that she was simply lost somewhere, maybe hiding in an abandoned trailer. Or maybe she was upset with someone and playing alone. But by dawn the next morning, when the sky was bright and no one had seen her return, fear began to creep in. Especially when the police reviewed the security cameras in the area. The last image captured was Sandra, wearing a pink shirt and black pants, skipping across the street at 3:54 p.m., and from there she disappeared as if swallowed from this world. As the news began to spread, millions of Americans turned their attention to the town of Tracy. An 8-year-old girl had disappeared in broad daylight. No witnesses. No obvious clues, no screams or struggles. How could a child just disappear like that? In the days that followed, hundreds of volunteers poured in to help search. Posters of Sandra's face were hung everywhere. Major television networks like CNN and ABC ran the news. Neighbors were questioned, homes were searched. Ponds, sewers, vacant lots, all were searched, and still nothing. The strange thing was, there was no sign of an attack, no one had heard anything, and there was no evidence that Sandra had left the property. And then, 10 days later, on April 6, 2009, a farmer found something unusual in an irrigation ditch about 3 miles from the community. A black suitcase floating in the muddy water. He thought it was trash until it was opened. Inside was the body of Sandra Cantu, her clothes still on, but her body painfully bent to fit into the small space. It was a sight that took the police by surprise, even those who had been investigating for years. News of the suitcase sent shockwaves through the country. No one expected the missing child to be found in such a gruesome way. But from there, the investigation took a completely different direction. The police knew that, to have hidden the body like that, the perpetrator had to be familiar with the area. And when they reviewed the security cameras again, they noticed a suspicious detail. Around the time Sandra disappeared, a purple SUV had been seen near her house, and no one in the neighborhood owned one except for one person. So who was Melissa Huckabee, a single mother, 28, the daughter of the pastor of the local church, a Bible teacher to children including Sandra, a neighbor just a few doors down? A person Sandra used to call Miss Melissa with a carefree, trusting smile. And Melissa was the first person to text Maria the day Sandra disappeared, asking, "What happened? I see so many police cars." She seemed concerned. She seemed shocked. But after the body was found, the truth began to emerge. Can you trust a Bible teacher on Sundays? A gentle, kind woman who always wore a long dress took her little girl to church and smiled at everyone. That was Melissa Huckabee, a single mother who lived in the same building as Sandra Cantu's family, a 28-year-old woman, the granddaughter of the local pastor, a woman who had held Sandra in her arms, taught her to sing hymns, and then, just days later, was arrested for her murder. But how did she get found? It all started with a suitcase. When Sandra's body was found in a suitcase floating in a ditch, investigators immediately saw something familiar. Because not long before, a woman in the building had reported that she had lost a black suitcase. That person was Melissa Huckabee. She told the police that her suitcase had been stolen. But the suitcase containing Sandra's body matched exactly in color, size, and style. It was too much of a coincidence. The police began to wonder. They began to pay attention to Melissa, and it didn't take long for them to realize there was something wrong with this woman. A few days later, Melissa went to the police station voluntarily. She cried and said she felt hurt by the suspicion. She said she was the one who was most heartbroken by Sandra's death. She even took the initiative to approach the media. In an interview with a tired face and tears in her eyes, she said, "I can't stand people looking at me like I'm a monster." But that initiative made the investigators even more suspicious. Who wants to attract attention when they're investigating a child murder case? Murderers usually avoid the spotlight. Melissa stepped into it as if she was acting. The police continued to follow up, and then another strange detail emerged. Melissa had sent a text message to the mother of another girl in the building. In it, she wrote, "I'm sorry for what happened. Tell her I didn't mean to do it. It was an accident." Wait, accident? Sorry for what? To whom? The other mother was confused. Her child was fine, so what was Melissa apologizing for? The police were stunned. They believed that Melissa had sent the wrong message, intended to send it to Sandra's mother, but accidentally sent it to someone else. An unexpected move, but one that had inadvertently exposed her. This was no longer suspicion. This was circumstantial evidence, a half-hearted confession. The police immediately returned to the church, where Melissa and her family regularly attended. They decided to check every nook and cranny, especially the rooms where she often went with the children for Bible study. And they discovered something terrifying. On the carpet in a small room there was blood. DNA analysis confirmed it was Sandra Cantu's blood, which meant Sandra had been here. She had stood in this very room before she was murdered. She had not been kidnapped from somewhere far away. She had not disappeared mysteriously. Sandra had been led into what she thought was safety, into the hands of someone she trusted. Melissa had used intimacy, familiarity, to do the unthinkable. When summoned again, Melissa seemed to lose control of her words. She confessed, but her confession was vague and fragmented. She said that what happened was an accident, that she had not intended to kill Sandra, but had just panicked, so she hid the body in a suitcase and threw it in a ditch. But what the forensics found said otherwise. Sandra's body showed signs of being drugged before her death. A powerful sedative called lorazepam used to treat anxiety and psychosis. That drug was prescribed to Melissa Huckabee herself. In addition, forensic doctors discovered that Sandra had been severely abused. She had been tied up, brutally bent over to fit into a small suitcase before being thrown into the water. This could not have been an accident. This was intentional, timed, premeditated. So what was the motive? Why would Melissa attack a child? The police began digging into Melissa's personal life. They discovered a past that was not as peaceful as it appeared. Melissa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and severe depression. She had a history of self-harm and had been fired from her job for erratic behavior. She had a 5-year-old daughter, the same age as Sandra, and had been suspected by acquaintances of unusual behavior with young children. Although she was never prosecuted, the rumors now became more terrifying than ever. Was Melissa simply a psychopath out of control, or was she a predator, hiding behind morals and religion, hiding her crimes in the guise of an angel? On April 10, 2009, Melissa Huckabee was arrested on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and child abuse. She was jailed that night. The entire community of Tracy, California was shocked. People couldn't believe their eyes. A woman they had trusted, who had sat in church with them, who had sung hymns with the children, was now behind the death of an 8-year-old girl. And the scariest thing was, no one suspected anything until it was too late. No one suspected that. The monster was so close, so familiar, but the case wasn't over. The investigation was clear. The crime was exposed. Now it was time for justice to speak. A small room, a woman with her head bowed, not daring to look at anyone, and across the room, Sandra Cantu's parents. The mother clenched her fists, her eyes filled with tears. The father clenched his jaw as if trying not to scream. They all sat there. In the first trial of Melissa Huckabee, the woman accused of killing the beloved 8-year-old girl. There was no crying, no screaming, just an eerie silence that filled the courtroom, because the crime was so horrible. So cruel and so unexpected. What did Melissa do? Why Sandra? And what really happened that fateful day? The prosecutors began to paint the whole picture in clear words, evidence by evidence. They say that on March 27, 2009, Sandra Cantu, like every child in the Orchard Estates neighborhood, was playing outside in the afternoon, just steps from her home. No one paid any attention to Melissa at the time. But security cameras later showed something strange. Sandra disappeared from the frame after Melissa appeared. They believe Melissa lured Sandra into her car by saying she needed help carrying things into the church. She trusted her and nodded in agreement. It was an innocent, naive act and also a fateful moment that robbed her of her future. When Sandra entered the small room in the church, where Melissa had taught the Bible, the door closed, and she never came out again. Investigators say Melissa drugged Sandra with lorazepam, a sedative prescribed to her. Then, somehow, perhaps only she knew, Melissa abused her, tied her hands, and put her body in a tiny suitcase. That suitcase was hers. And that was the biggest flaw. The police found Sandra's DNA not only in the suitcase, but also in the church room, in Melissa's car, and on the straps that bound her body. They also discovered that Melissa had stopped by a store that evening, buying a bottle of industrial cleaner, as if to cover up the crime. But it was too late. The evidence was everywhere. But despite the overwhelming evidence, Melissa initially denied the accusations. She cried. She said she didn't remember anything. She said her mind was blank, that maybe she had done something in a panic. It was a tactic. But no one believed her. Psychologists were called in. They assessed Melissa as having a history of bipolar disorder and depression, yes, but no one thought she was so out of control that she didn't know what she was doing. Melissa knew. Every move was calculated, every step was deliberate. So the biggest question remains unanswered. Why did Melissa Huckabee kill a child who had no grudge? Why did she choose Sandra, someone who had played with her daughter? A number of theories began to emerge. Investigators speculated that Melissa was in a state of extreme emotional turmoil, having just lost her job, struggling to raise a child alone, and feeling like she was losing control. But was that enough to turn her into a killer? Some speculated that Melissa was jealous of Sandra's mother, a young woman who was well-liked by the community. Perhaps in Melissa's troubled mind, harming Sandra was a way to hurt the mother back. Other speculations were even more chilling, that Melissa had a compulsive urge to harm children and that Sandra was just the first victim to be discovered. But in the end, no one really knew for sure. Melissa never revealed the whole truth. She unexpectedly pleaded guilty in May 2010 in a plea deal with prosecutors to avoid the death penalty. She admitted to kidnapping and killing Sandra, but offered no explanation. She only repeated that it was a terrible mistake, that she didn't understand why I did it. The courtroom was silent. Sandra's father, Daniel Cantu, stood up, looked directly at Melissa and said, "You took my world away. You took my little girl away, and now you can't even tell me why." That question will never be answered. Melissa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 25 years to life for kidnapping and child abuse. She was sent to a women's prison in Chowchilla, California, where she would spend the rest of her life behind 4 cold walls. But for Sandra's family, justice doesn't mean healing. They no longer hear her laugh. No longer see her little feet skipping around the house. No longer are they hugged before bed. All that remains is emptiness and memories. Sandra's story shocked the nation, not just because the victim was an 8-year-old girl, but because the killer was a woman who taught ethics and the Bible. She didn't come from the outside, as we often think of criminals. She was right there in the community, in familiar arms. The most heartbreaking question is, how many other Melissas are living among us, wearing masks of kindness but hiding the darkness inside? Tracy was never the same again. People began locking their doors more tightly, looking at strangers with suspicion. The church where Melissa once taught, now empty. Sandra's pictures are hung everywhere, a reminder of the unexpected. Sandra's parents set up a charity in her name to help families of missing children. They said, "If we can't bring our daughter back, at least we can protect other children." But does justice really end here? Or are there mysteries, details that have never been told? Could a crime like this have been committed alone? Is Melissa hiding something that neither we nor the courts have ever known? When Melissa Huckabee entered her first cell, the outside world began to learn to go on without Sandra. The town of Tracy was no longer the peaceful place where children ran around on the lawn in the afternoons. No longer a place where people left their cars unlocked, doors ajar, or smiled at anyone, especially those who knew. Well, a part of that trust died with Sandra Cantu, and the scariest thing is it can never be regained. Sandra's family, especially her mother, Maria Chavez, live in a spiral of memories and regrets. She once told a television interview, "The last time I saw Sandra was when she ran out of the house, turned around and smiled. I thought she'll be back soon. But she never came back." How can a mother forgive herself when she knows her daughter's killer was not a stranger, but a woman she had invited into her home, played with her daughter, and sat at the same table? How can one go on living when trust kills the child she loves most? In the month since the case was closed, hundreds of letters, teddy bears, flowers, and pictures of Sandra have been placed in a small corner near where she used to play. People still stop by every day like a quiet ritual. They don't cry out loud, they don't scream. But everyone feels the pain, a dull, silent, and everlasting pain. Although Melissa Huckabee was convicted and imprisoned for life, unanswered questions continue to haunt her. Many people wonder, did Melissa really act alone? Did anyone hear her say anything strange before the murder? And was this the first time, Or was it just the first time it was discovered? The FBI once described this as one of the most morally disturbed cases they had ever investigated, not only because of the nature of the crime, but also because of the strange inconsistencies in the killer's profile. Melissa had been a preacher, had cried while teaching about love, had cared for children in the neighborhood. She did not fit any standard criminal profile. No one suspected, no one was alert. This caused experts to rethink the entire concept of a killer. Are we so focused on the man in the dark that we forget that danger can come from the people we trust the most? The Sandra Cantu case also prompted California authorities to discuss better controls on sedatives and psychiatric drugs, especially for people with a history of mental illness. Part of Melissa's plea agreement said she used lorazepam, a prescription drug that can cause unconsciousness, to control Sandra. The problem? No one was monitoring Melissa closely enough, even though she had shown signs of mental instability, had been hospitalized for depression, and had lost her job because of her behavior. Many people are asking, should someone have intervened sooner? What did the health care system, the schools, the community miss? But now it's too late. The Cantu family later founded an organization called Sandra's Smile, dedicated to supporting families with missing children, providing resources, skills, and psychological support services for parents in similar situations. Every year on Sandra's birthday, they hold a small event in the park where she used to play. Pink balloons are released into the sky, bearing her name and loving messages from friends and relatives. No more tears, only love. A love that never fades, even when the person who brought it has left this world. One of the most touching moments was when Sandra's brother, then 13 years old, stood up in front of the crowd and said, "I know Sandra will never come back, but I promise to always protect other children the way she played with me. She was more than just my sister, she was an angel." Those words in the windy, sunny afternoon air silenced the park. The Sandra Cantu case will always be a deep wound in the hearts of Tracy residents, a symbol of innocence betrayed, a painful lesson in trusting the wrong person, and a reminder that evil has no fixed face. It can smile, it can teach. It can live right next door in the same neighborhood or even in the same church. And while Sandra is gone, her story will continue to be told, not to instill fear, but to awaken awareness, to inspire change, and to keep her memory alive. Because every child deserves to be safe, and no child should be a victim of adult negligence. Do you remember Sandra's face? If not, look again. Look into the sparkling eyes of an 8-year-old girl who believed that everyone was good, that her neighbors were her friends, that her Bible teacher was her protector. Her death was a tragedy, but it is only meaningless if we learn nothing from it. We cannot change the past, but we can change the future by telling the truth and never forgetting. Thank you for watching.